Have you ever thought about what it would really be like to live somewhere that everyone else avoids? A place where the streets are empty, the air feels heavy, and the buildings seem to remember the lives that once filled them. I've walked through towns where silence isn't peaceful, it's unsettling, where danger, decay, and isolation aren't stories, they're real. Today we're exploring 10 places in the US you should never move to in 2026, and some of these will haunt your imagination. If you're enjoying this journey through America's most mysterious and abandoned places, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe to Traveling Guide Hub for more real-life adventures. 1. Centralia, Pennsylvania. People call it a ghost town, but here, the ghosts might be the smoke beneath your feet. I still remember the first thing I noticed when I arrived in Centralia. It was quiet. Not peaceful, but heavy, like the land itself was holding its breath. Centralia was founded in the mid-1800s around rich anthracite coal seams. For decades, mining wasn't just work, it was life. Schools rang with children's laughter, churches filled with families, and streets bustled with miners heading to the shafts. Coal gave this town a heartbeat that seemed permanent. Then, 1962 changed everything, forever. A small fire in an abandoned coal pit, likely started during a routine trash burn, slipped underground and ignited the coal seams beneath the town. It wasn't visible at first, but the fire spread silently, creeping through tunnels beneath homes and streets. Smoke seeped through cracks in the roads. Carbon monoxide filled the air. The ground became dangerously unstable. Sinkholes appeared without warning. By the 1980s, the government declared Centralia uninhabitable. Most residents were relocated, houses were demolished, zip codes were erased. A town was slowly wiped off the map, not by war, not by disaster, by something no one could see. Smoke still rises from cracks in the asphalt, as if the town itself is exhaling, a constant reminder that it is far from dead. Even with warning signs everywhere, some still wander its empty streets. Some claim the town watches them back. Visitors tell of strange experiences. Footsteps crunch on gravel behind you, yet when you turn, no one is there. Near cracked highways, the ground warms strangely beneath your shoes, and a faint smell of sulfur lingers in the air. Sometimes a low hum rises from the earth itself. The silence is oppressive, heavy on your chest, as if the town remembers those who once lived here. Yet a handful of residents still call Centralia home. They speak not of ghosts, but of memories, of refusing to leave the place where their families lived. To them, the fire is just something they've learned to live with, a constant hum beneath their feet, as natural as breathing. As I walked away, I realized the eeriest part wasn't the smoke or the cracks. It was how a town could hold on to its past this tightly. Do you think it ever truly lets people go?
2. Pitcher, Oklahoma. People call it a ghost town, but here, the ghosts might be the poison in the ground. I first drove into Pitcher, Oklahoma. The streets were empty in a way that felt unnatural. The wind moved through broken windows like whispers of the past. Every creak, rattle, or distant clang seemed louder than it should be. The silence presses on you, thick and heavy, as if the town itself is holding its breath. Pitcher wasn't always like this. Founded in the early 1900s, it was part of the Tri-State Mining District, one of the richest lead and zinc mining areas in the country. During its peak, schools, stores, and theaters were full of life. Hundreds of homes housed families of miners who built a tight-knit community. Children ran along streets lined with picket fences, neighbors shared meals and stories, and the town had a rhythm, a heartbeat that felt permanent. For decades, Pitcher thrived, a symbol of opportunity in rural Oklahoma. But decades of mining left a dangerous legacy. The ground was filled with chat piles, heaps of mining waste. The soil and water became heavily contaminated with lead, zinc, and other toxins. Homes, schools, and playgrounds carried invisible hazards. Children and adults alike were exposed to dangerous levels of lead for years, and health problems quietly mounted. By 2006, the government declared the town uninhabitable. Most residents were relocated, buildings were demolished, streets fell silent, swallowed by dust, weeds, and the weight of memory. Nature slowly crept back, reclaiming streets and sidewalks, while the remnants of homes and schools stood as grim reminders of what once was. Even today, walking through Pitcher is unsettling. Near the old mines, the earth feels restless. Chat piles, gray and jagged, stretch toward the horizon. Dust rises with even the lightest step, clinging to your shoes and clothes. Broken windows stare like empty eyes. Every gust of wind carries a faint metallic tang of history. Some people claim to see shadows moving across abandoned walls, though when they look closer, there is nothing. Sometimes, even in broad daylight, you feel like something is watching, though you see no one. Others report sudden headaches, a strange pressure in the chest, or a faint metallic smell lingering in the air. The ground occasionally trembles or collapses slightly near mine entrances, a constant reminder that danger still lurks below, invisible but real. A few residents refuse to leave. They speak not of ghosts, but of family, history, and the stubborn attachment to the only home they've ever known. To them, Pitcher is more than abandoned buildings. It's a story written into the land itself, a memory that refuses to fade. As I left Pitcher, I realized the eeriest part wasn't just the contamination or the empty streets. It was how a town could survive only as memory, haunting anyone who dares to step inside. If a place can carry its past so heavily in the soil itself, would you dare to walk its streets alone?
3. Gary, Indiana. People call it a ghost town in the making. But here, the ghosts are the echoes of lives that once filled these streets. I remember driving into Gary, Indiana. The silence hit me first. Not the quiet of a sleepy town, but heavy, almost oppressive, broken only by the distant creak of a swinging street sign or the harsh call of a lone crow overhead. The air smelled faintly of rust and oil, carrying the weight of decades gone by. Gary wasn't always empty. Founded in 1906 by U.S. Steel, it was a booming industrial city. Thousands of steelworkers and their families lived here. Neighborhoods thrived, schools rang with children's laughter, and shops and theaters buzzed with life. For decades, the mills were the heartbeat of the city. The laughter of children and the clanging of machinery seemed like echoes trapped between the bricks and weeds, faint whispers of a life that once roared through these streets. But decades of industrial decline changed everything. Factories closed, jobs vanished, families left in search of work. Crime and poverty rose. Neighborhoods that were once lively became abandoned almost overnight. By the early 2000s, vast stretches of Gary were empty. Homes boarded up, schools closed, streets cracked and grew over with weeds. The city seemed to exhale emptiness, a hollow memory of its former self. Walking through the city today, the decay is impossible to ignore. Windows shattered, streetlights hang crookedly, rusting cars sit untouched for years. The wind whistles through empty alleyways like it's telling stories the walls themselves can't hold. Occasionally, a faint sound, a door creaking, a metal pipe banging catches your attention. You turn, and nothing is there. For a moment, it feels like the walls themselves are watching you. Some areas are still dangerous. The ground beneath abandoned buildings sometimes shifts unexpectedly. Collapsing floors and weakened foundations are a silent reminder that this isn't just eerie, it's hazardous. Yet a handful of residents still call Gary home. They speak not of ghosts, but of memory and resilience. They stay because this is where their families lived, where generations were born, and where leaving isn't just moving, it's erasing part of themselves. The city carries its past in every cracked sidewalk, every empty lot, every rusted rail. Life and decay exist side by side. History whispers at anyone who walks its streets if they listen closely enough. As I drove out of Gary, the most haunting thought wasn't the abandoned homes or empty streets, it was how quickly a thriving city can fade, leaving behind shadows of people who once gave it life. If a place can crumble, yet still hold the weight of so many lives, would you dare to step inside its streets alone?
Number 4. East St. Louis, Illinois. People call it a city that time forgot, but here the silence feels heavy, almost alive. I remember driving into East St. Louis. The streets were empty in a way that didn't feel natural. Windows stared blankly from boarded-up homes. Every distant sound, the hum of a transformer, a loose metal sign swaying, a sudden gust of wind, echoed unnervingly through the emptiness. The air smelled faintly of damp concrete and rust, carrying the weight of decades gone by. East St. Louis wasn't always like this. Founded in the 18th century and booming in the early 1900s, it became a hub for shipping, industry, and railroads. Factories and warehouses brought thousands of jobs. Neighborhoods thrived. Families built communities. Children played on streets lined with houses full of life, and schools and theaters were packed. For decades, it was a place of opportunity, energy, and movement, a city that pulsed with ambition and pride. But decades of economic decline changed everything. Factories closed, industry left, unemployment skyrocketed, crime rates rose as poverty spread, and once thriving neighborhoods began to empty. By the late 20th century, large parts of East St. Louis were abandoned. Streets cracked, homes were boarded up, and graffiti covered walls that once rang with laughter. Where children once ran and neighbors argued or laughed, now only weeds and silence grew. Walking through the city today is surreal. Empty streets stretch for blocks. The air feels thick with absence. Wind whistles through broken windows, rattling doors and metal scraps. Sometimes you hear footsteps echo behind you, only to turn and find no one there. Shadows shift strangely across walls. The air sometimes carries faint whispers, though no one is around to speak them. Occasionally, a flickering streetlight or sudden gust makes you jump, reminding you that these streets are still alive in their own unsettling way. Some areas are unstable. Crumbling sidewalks and weakened buildings could give way at the slightest touch. Even as weeds grow through cracks and walls crumble, every corner holds traces of lives that once laughed, argued, and dreamed here. Yet a small number of residents still call East St. Louis home. They speak not of ghosts, they speak of roots, family, and the pride of surviving in a city the world has mostly forgotten. As I drove away, the eeriest part wasn't just the decay, it was the lingering sense of presence. Every empty house, every overgrown lot feels like it remembers the people who once walked here, even if they're long gone. If a city can carry the weight of its history so heavily, even in abandonment, would you dare to walk its streets alone?
5. Paradise, California. People call it a town lost to flames, but here the air still smells of smoke and the silence carries memories of a life abruptly taken. I first drove into Paradise. The first thing I noticed was the eerie stillness. Streets were empty, houses charred or boarded up. The wind moved through broken trees with a haunting whisper.
Even the sunlight seemed hesitant to touch the blackened ground. Paradise wasn't always this way. Founded in the late 1800s as a small mountain community, it grew into a thriving town known for its forests, schools, and close-knit neighborhoods. Families lived here for generations. Children played freely in yards. Neighbors greeted each other on streets lined with trees, and community events brought people together. For decades, Paradise was a safe, welcoming place, a town with life and laughter stitched into every street. Everything changed in November 2018. The campfire swept through the town with unbelievable speed, fueled by dry conditions and high winds. In just hours, over 18,000 structures were destroyed. Nearly 90 people lost their lives. Streets that were once bustling became unrecognizable. Burned-out cars lined the roads, trees reduced to blackened stumps. Neighborhoods vanished under ash and smoke. Walking through the ruins today, the devastation is palpable. Charred foundations mark the landscape. Occasional wisps of smoke rise from hidden embers in the forest. The air smells sharply of burnt wood. The wind carries it down empty streets, twisting it into haunting patterns. Sometimes a faint crackling sound, like fire burning long after it should have gone out, makes you pause as shadows shift strangely across ruined walls. Yet, a handful of residents have returned. They speak not of ghosts, but of determination, resilience, and attachment to the life they had before the fire. They rebuild slowly, holding on to memories and refusing to let Paradise disappear completely. Walking among the ruins, you can feel their presence, neighbors who still care for trees, gardens, and the few standing homes, as if the town itself refuses to die. Even as you drive away, the most haunting part isn't just the destruction, it's how quickly a town full of life can vanish, leaving behind echoes of laughter, pain, and perseverance. If a place can burn completely, yet still hold the memories of its people so vividly, would you dare to walk its streets alone?
6. Slab City, California. People call it the last free place in America, but here the silence feels heavier than the desert sun. I first drove into Slab City. The first thing I noticed was the endless flat horizon, broken only by abandoned concrete foundations, rusted vehicles, and the occasional solitary figure wandering under the scorching sun. The desert stretches in every direction, and even the wind feels alive, whispering through metal scraps and dry sand. Slab City wasn't always just empty slabs and desert dust. It began as a World War II Marine Corps training base, Camp Dunlap, built on the edge of the Sonoran Desert. After the war, the base was abandoned, leaving behind only concrete foundations where buildings once stood. Over decades, the location attracted people seeking freedom from rent, bills, and conventional society, artists, wanderers, and those who wanted to live off the grid. It became a community of outsiders, vibrant in its own unique way. But life here is harsh. The desert heat is relentless. Water is scarce. The land is unforgiving. Abandoned trailers and rusting vehicles litter the sand, making every step unpredictable. The ground can be treacherous, with hidden holes and crumbling foundations beneath your feet. By night, the wind sweeps across the slabs, carrying a lonely whistle that echoes through the desert, making every sound feel magnified. Walking through Slab City, you quickly realize it is alive in ways you can't always see. People report strange, inexplicable sounds at night, distant laughter, clanging metal, or footsteps moving across empty areas. Shadows shift unnaturally among the ruins of trailers and art installations. Occasionally, the air carries a faint chemical or metallic scent, lingering from decades of abandonment and desert decay, as if the place remembers the people who passed through. Yet, despite its dangers, a small community persists. Residents speak not of ghosts, but of freedom and resilience. They build shelters from scrap, create vibrant murals, and form bonds with neighbors who, like them, refuse to conform to society's rules. To them, Slab City is more than concrete and sand. It's a place to live untethered, where life continues in a raw, uncompromising form. As I left Slab City, the eeriest part wasn't the isolation or the desert heat. It was realizing that this place survives purely because people refuse to leave, clinging to a sense of freedom that most of the world has long forgotten. If a place can be both alive and abandoned at the same time, would you dare to step into its streets after dark?
7. Whittier, Alaska. People call it the town where everyone lives in one building, but here the isolation feels heavier than the Alaska snow. I first drove into Whittier. The first thing that hit me was the silence. The mountains loom around the harbor. The only sounds are the occasional creak of a ship, distant gulls, and the wind pressing through narrow streets. Whittier wasn't always a curiosity. It was built during World War II as a strategic port and military supply base. The town grew around the Buckner Building, a massive concrete structure designed to house soldiers, complete with offices, apartments, and storage. Over time, it became the hub for residents, with nearly everyone living under the same roof to endure the harsh weather and long, dark winters. The geography makes Whittier unique, but also challenging. Surrounded by mountains and water, the town is accessible only through a single tunnel or by boat, making evacuation difficult in emergencies. Heavy snowfall and rain can isolate the town for days, and avalanches are a constant threat. For decades, residents have learned to endure, adapt, and rely on one another to survive in one of the most remote communities in America. Walking through Whittier today, the town feels both alive and claustrophobic. The Buckner Building towers over the streets like a fortress. Footsteps echo in hallways that stretch endlessly. Heaters hum low. Sometimes the structure groans under the weight of snow. Outside, the wind howls through narrow streets, carrying the scent of salt water and damp concrete. Shadows stretch across snow-covered streets, and the mountains loom like silent guardians or watchers. Despite the extreme conditions, the residents persist. They speak not of ghosts, but of community and endurance. Families have lived here for generations, choosing to stay because the town is home, no matter how isolated or challenging it may be. As I left Whittier, the eeriest part wasn't the isolation, it was how a town could survive under snow, surrounded by mountains, with everyone living under one roof, yet still feel both lonely and alive. If a place can hold its people together in one building and still feel so vast and mysterious, would you dare to spend a winter here? 8. Utqiagvik, Barrow, Alaska. People call it the northernmost town in America. But here, the cold feels alive, and the silence presses against you like a living thing. I first arrived in Utqiagvik, Alaska. The first thing I noticed was the sky. For weeks, it hovers in a pale gray, barely changing. The sun doesn't rise for months. The streets are quiet, broken only by the crunch of snow beneath my boots and the occasional distant howl of a sled dog. Barrow wasn't always this extreme, but it has always been a place of survival. Founded as a whaling village by the Inupiat people and later a U.S. settlement, it became a hub for Arctic exploration and military outposts. Life here revolves around the harsh environment, freezing temperatures, high winds, and months of darkness or continuous sunlight. Generations of families have endured, relying on each other and the land for sustenance and survival. Walking through Barrow today, the town feels almost otherworldly. Buildings are built to withstand fierce winds and icy conditions, but many streets remain empty for stretches. Wind whips across roofs, doors rattle, and structures creak as they adjust to frost. Snowdrifts pile along alleyways, shifting with each gust. Sometimes a faint smell of diesel or wood smoke hints at the few heating sources still running. The light, or lack of it, makes shadows stretch unnaturally, giving even familiar streets an eerie, unfamiliar feel. Despite the extreme isolation, the people of Barrow persist. They speak not of ghosts, but of endurance and community. Families have lived here for generations, surviving the Arctic darkness, hunting and fishing for food, and relying on neighbors for support. Their resilience turns an unforgiving landscape into a place of life, connection, and history. Even so, walking through Barrow, you feel a strange tension between human life and the vast, empty wilderness that surrounds it. The town exists in a delicate balance where survival is constant and the environment always dominates. As I left Utqiagvik, the eeriest part wasn't just the cold or isolation, it was how a community could thrive at the very edge of the world, yet make you feel both welcomed and unnervingly small at the same time. If a place can survive at the top of the world, with months of darkness pressing in, would you dare to walk its streets alone? 9. Tonopah, Nevada. People call it the silver town that time forgot, but here the desert stretches endlessly, and the quiet feels heavier than the heat. I first drove into Tonopah, Nevada. The first thing that struck me was the sense of emptiness. Buildings leaned under the harsh sun, streets cracked from decades of neglect. The wind carried the faint scent of dust and old metal. Tonopah wasn't always abandoned. Founded in 1900 after a massive silver strike, it quickly became Nevada's mining hub. Miners flocked here, bringing families, businesses, and life to the desert. Hotels, theaters, and schools opened, and the town thrived. For decades, Tonopah was a symbol of opportunity in the harsh Nevada landscape, a place where fortunes were made and lives were built from grit and determination. But like many mining towns, its boom didn't last. The silver veins ran dry, mines closed, the population dwindled. By the mid-20th century, much of Tonopah was abandoned, leaving empty streets, derelict buildings, and forgotten homes. Nature slowly began reclaiming the town, with sand drifting into empty storefronts and cacti pushing through cracked sidewalks. Walking through Tonopah today feels surreal. The desert wind whistles through broken windows, rattling doors and metal signs. Shadows stretch oddly over the cracked asphalt. The occasional gust carries the faint smell of minerals from old mine shafts. Sometimes, even in broad daylight, you feel like someone or something is watching from an abandoned porch or behind a shuttered window. Every sound feels sharper. Every distant movement is more unsettling. Yet a few residents remain, stubbornly clinging to a town that most have long forgotten. They speak not of ghosts, but of history, memory, and the quiet resilience required to live in the desert. Some maintain small homes, others keep watch over the old mines. All carry the stories of Tonopah's heyday in their voices and eyes. As I drove out, the eeriest part wasn't the abandoned buildings or empty streets. It was the sense that the town remembers everything. Every laugh, every argument, every fortune won and lost still echoes in the desert, waiting for anyone daring enough to step inside. If a place can fade from fame, yet still hold its history so strongly, would you dare to walk its streets alone?
10. Jackson, Mississippi. People call it a city haunted by neglect, but here the air feels heavy, carrying the weight of decades of struggle. I first drove into Jackson, Mississippi. The first thing I noticed was the quiet. Not the calm of a peaceful town, but the kind of silence that presses against you, broken only by the distant hum of a train, the creak of an old street sign, or the rustle of leaves in abandoned lots. Jackson wasn't always like this. Founded in 1821, it grew into the state capital and a center of culture, education, and commerce. Schools, theaters, and bustling neighborhoods made it a vibrant city, home to generations of families and a hub for civil rights history. For decades, Jackson thrived with a strong sense of community, pride, and purpose. But decades of economic decline, corruption, and systemic neglect changed everything. Factories and local businesses closed, unemployment rose, neighborhoods emptied as people moved in search of opportunity. Crime increased, infrastructure decayed. Many parts of the city fell into abandonment. By the early 2000s, streets that were once full of life were lined with boarded-up homes, empty schools, and rusting cars. Walking through Jackson today, the atmosphere is surreal. Empty streets stretch for blocks, punctuated by abandoned homes and stores. The wind whistles through broken windows and rattling doors, carrying the scent of damp earth and old paint. Sometimes, in the quiet of an alley or a deserted street, you swear you hear footsteps behind you or a door creak in a house that hasn't been occupied for years. Shadows stretch long under flickering streetlights, and the sense of presence lingers, as if the city remembers the lives that once filled it. Yet a resilient few still remain. Residents speak not of ghosts, but of memory, pride, and attachment to a home that tells their story. They maintain what they can, hold on to community ties, and continue living despite the challenges. Their presence is a quiet testament to the human spirit, keeping Jackson alive even where decay threatens to take over. As I left the city, the eeriest part wasn't the emptiness, it was the feeling that Jackson itself remembers everything. Every laugh, every argument, every life once lived within its streets. If a city can carry the weight of its past so heavily, even in neglect, would you dare to walk its streets alone? These towns are more than empty streets and abandoned buildings. They're reminders of how quickly life can change and how human resilience fights to survive against disaster, decay, and isolation. Each place carries stories of memory, struggle, and sometimes tragedy, leaving behind shadows that linger long after the people move on. Whether it's fire, industrial collapse, or harsh environments, these towns show a side of America most never see. Which of these places would you dare to visit or live in if you had the chance? Share your thoughts in the comments below.